One thing I want to say about the book in general is, even though it traces an arc from here in the bohemian 1950s in New York, out to the West Coast, in Oregon, Pacific Northwest, and back to here, I think there were parallel experiences going on all around the world, and certainly in the counterculture capitals like the Southwest, where New Buffalo and the other southwestern communes were, and Vermont, where so much of the back to the land people were digging in, and Bread and Puppet, and many of the other enclaves that exist to this day. I'm going to read a little bit more. I want to read a little bit more about gardening here, and then I'm going to wrap up, and I want to thank everybody for coming here. I want to talk about solutions, because in the beginning of the book, I talk about a lot of the problems. And I'm trying to aim at what are the solutions. And there are solutions, and they're going to come from, as we say in the Southwest, the Pueblo. They're going to come from the people. They're going to come from people working together as neighbors and neighborhoods. The solutions are not going to come from the top down. The governments are not going to hand us the solutions. The banks aren't going to hand us the solutions. The corporations aren't going to hand us the solutions. It's got to come from individuals who have good ideas, working together, and making these solutions happen. So, after 12 years of back to the land life in the hills of Oregon, we still have not solved the economic puzzle. Granted that early on, much of the time had been spent struggling with community dynamics and our own personal foibles, or issues as they came to be known. Granted that we had strayed into territory both social and agricultural that we had no real training for. Granted that we were young, full of belief and enthusiasm, but without experience, without knowledge, and without tradition. Granted that we were stoned in organics as well as inorganics. Granted all these, it's a wonder that we survived as long as we did. We did become more mellow, just as aging country casks should get. And we did learn how to produce the produce, to coax the bountiful harvest right out of the earth. But marketing was another matter. And preserving freshness en route to market, still another. And storage was another. And transportation, weighing, packaging, bagging, boxing, lifting, loading. All of these are steps in the economic reality of farming, especially for the Newfoundling organic farming, where the steady roots from field to consumer market weren't yet established. Even after all the plowing and tilling and planting and growing, and the season's worth of maneuvers with equipment and irrigation, many more steps remained before there was any economic return. Plus, when a part burst on the water pump at the tractor's carburetor, there went hundreds of dollars, looking to me like bushels of organic Italian Romano beans turning themselves into finely tooled small metal parts. And the mechanical work that went along with it consumed more time than I'd ever imagined. It was a constant wrangling with the equipment, hitches, motors, valves, rotors, huge tires to change. To run a farm, you have to be able to run a full machine shop, too. The fall crops were harvested, seeds and garlic were drying. My cousin was getting married in Denver, so I took a 30-day bus ticket to go to the wedding in Denver and then visit my daughter Eden, now in middle school on the East Coast. So I went and followed up with Eden. I came here to the city where I stayed up at the apartment, 800 West End, that many, many of you have been to. I stayed there and I walked downtown to Joni's. Joni was living in a rundown duplex loft in the then very wild East Village. Joni was heating the place with a wood stove. We scavenged wood from old broken pallets and anything wooden in the trash on the streets. The landlords of her building had also quit making any repairs. Because the neighborhood was so dilapidated, Drug-ridden and crime-prone, the rents were so low they didn't cover repairs, and greedy slime bucket building owners wouldn't dip into their centuries' worth of profits to fix the places so there could be, at a minimum, hot and cold, water, heat, light, and safe stairs. But in her building, the tenants had taken on the jobs themselves. Celtic bard and constructionist David Boyle lived there and engineered the community aspect of building renovation. They patched roofs, they fixed staircases, they replaced the electric, and they stopped paying rent. They even put solar panels on the roof. Directly kitty-corner from Joni's loft space loomed a colossal, even more run-down skeleton of a building. There was a flop house on one end of it, a dice hall in the corridor on the eastern side, a bordello wagon that parked every evening on the north, and a crack house on the far other end. Why? In an old rat house like that, there was room for everybody. The owners had long ago stopped making repairs. The tenants had long ago stopped paying rent. The building had slowly been stripped of all its valuable fixtures. Copper wire, railings, flooring, plumbing, all torn out by hands willing to sell it for scrap. The owners defaulted on the taxes, and now the city owned this dissolute harbor. The following winter, during an ice storm, tiles and bricks slide off the roof. They land kablam on the streets and sidewalks below. The city has no choice but to rope off the corner and begin plans for demolition. In the end, they leave a rubble-heaped open lot. Behind one of the hills of brickbats and iron parts, almost entirely hidden from the street, Joni dumps some soil and plants some tomatoes. By midsummer, her plants are knee-high. And look, there's another patch of green behind another rubble mound. There's someone else gardening. It's Melinda Futrell, the black community activist who lives 1 block south. From Joni and Melinda's alliance sprang a vital and vigorous community movement. Sure, there were community gardens in the neighborhood before this, but most of them were fiefdoms, lots held by one group of friends or relatives, gardened and protected, but not really open to the community in the city, or the city. Yes, there were others even nearby whose members formed not-for-profits or community trusts. But out of this particular alliance, there grew a network of community gardeners and a neighborhood harvest fair and a series of arts events and poetry readings, and a community stage got erected where performances, open and free to the public, became regular events and a program for the elderly in the home nearby, and so on. The community garden founded on that spot became a nexus for the neighborhood and all its people. The rest of the chapter talks about working with my son Tamaron and developing a children's gardening program. I think I'm going to leave you to read that on your own because there's only so much time this evening. But in the community gardening, what I found was all the skills that I had learned in Oregon and gone dead broke with were useful right here in the city. And I began to see how the talents and the information that we learn in one situation that seems like we're just spinning our wheels, we're not getting anywhere, you can flip them into a totally different situation, like the canyons of the city, and turn those into something that's useful and beautiful and sustainable.